Hello, dear colleagues. So I will continue actually the topic of the previous speaker. Tell me if you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Thanks. So I'm here to, first of all, thank you for the chance of sharing our experience and level up our skills in the field. I'm talking about developing content and language integrated lessons, learning lessons for adult learners, and I will actually share our experience of implementation and developing such lessons in our Skyeng online school. So first of all, as one of my colleagues has already mentioned, content and language integrated learning is a rather relatively new concept for European innovation, but the term can be traced back to 1994, but the concept has been used long ago. It is the approach when students learn a subject and the second language at the same time. So here we have two elements to look at. We have the subject. This can be anything from academic subjects to even life skills taught in the context of the classroom, and the medium of instruction, that is the language inside the classroom to explain the subject. Let's mention the benefits of the method. Content and language integrated learning can be seen as a more natural way to learn a language. When a subject or life skills are taught in that language, that is a concrete reason to learn both at the same time. And as students have real context to learn language, they are often more motivated to do so. Being content focused, the approach promotes a deeper level of assimilation as students are continually exposed to similar language and language functions they need to produce and recall information in their second language. Furthermore, it also encourages the development of the 21st century critical skills such as critical thinking, communication, and creativity. But the approach can be rather challenging. So to mention the hardships, the most important is that the teacher needs to concept check and scaffold the materials to be sure that both subject matter and language are being taught. Another noticeable challenge is the balance between knowledge of the subject matter and the knowledge of the language. For English teachers, it means that many times planning a lesson also means studying the subject itself. When we plan such a lesson, it is important to balance the teaching of theoretical knowledge and development of communicative competences. Let's look at what contributes to a successful learning of both language and content. The first element is the 4C implementation. According to the 4C curriculum that was presented by Coyle in 1999, a successful content and language integrated learning lesson should elements of 4C, that is content, progression and knowledge in skills, progression of knowledge and skills, communication, that is language to be learned, cognition, that is developing thinking skills, which link concept formation, understanding and language, and culture, that is deepening awareness of otherness and self. The second element is for language skills. What I mean is that in such lessons, all 4 language skills should be combined: listening, reading, speaking, and writing. As for listening and reading tasks, such activities should use meaningful materials, first of all, as they are the major source of the input in the lesson. Speaking focuses mainly on frequency, on fluency, and accuracy is seen as subordinate. Writing may comprise a series of activities through which grammar can also be recycled. And the last element is the lesson framework. The lesson framework often follows 4 stages. The first one is processing the text. The second one is identification and organization of knowledge. The third one is language identification. And the last one is about skills, skills-based tasks and subject-oriented tasks. Now let me show let me show how it actually is implemented in our new general course for adults. We will look at the lessons from intermediate and upper intermediate levels, lessons on emotional intelligence, nonverbal communication, and communication techniques. I am not focusing on specialized courses such as English for finance or English for programming. I am only to show how we develop the elements of content and language integrated learning in our general English course for adults, together with traditional ESL lessons. So let's take a look at some of the lessons. As I have already mentioned before, the first stage would be, in such lessons, would be input through the text, that is listening and reading activities. Here you see how the teacher and the student see the lesson objectives. The lesson is on the topic of emotional intelligence. So they set the goals to enrich vocabulary on the topic of job skills, to talk about emotional intelligence and why it is important, and learn about emotional intelligence. The first stage is about text, listening and reading activities. Here you have the example of the listening activity, when the student has to listen to the reporter talking about International Economic Forum, where they have concluded that emotional intelligence would be an important skill for future jobs. The second task is reading the text on the topic. Let's take another example from the lesson on nonverbal communication. Again, listening task on the topic and reading task on the topic. The second stage of the lesson framework would be knowledge identification. This is realized through the series of post-listening and post-reading questions for discussion. You have an example of post-reading discussion on emotional intelligence and post-listening discussion on nonverbal communication. The third stage of the lesson framework in this approach is the language identification. Language is approached lexically rather than grammatically, and learners on the stage of language identification are expected to be able to reproduce the core of the text in their own words. In such cases, it's a good idea to either visualize what they have to reproduce, as you may see from this example, where they are looking through the gestures on nonverbal communication. The lesson is on nonverbal communication, and the gestures are visualized. Or another good idea is to highlight the useful language in the text and to categorize it according to the functions. Here we have the lexical units which are highlighted in the text. Collocations, semi-fixed expressions, discourse markers, functional language, they can also be given attention to, as well as the subject-specific vocabulary. And the last stage, the fourth stage of the lesson framework is actually the task. As I have already mentioned, in such lessons, all four language skills should be combined. But what I would like to highlight is that production tasks should be designed, should be more subject orientated. That means that when, in this case, when content is to be focused, as we have here, some language support can also be required. As you may see from these examples, these are the examples of production tasks from the lessons on emotional intelligence, nonverbal communication. Here, the student has to interpret the gestures they see in the pictures, to describe, to prepare their speech on communication techniques and why they are important, how to apply them. And as I have already mentioned, language support is very important here. So we have some word lists. It's impossible to show all of them here, unfortunately, but we have some word lists to provide the learner with the necessary vocabulary to use in their speaking and writing activity as well. Here is an example of a product stage or from the lesson on emotional intelligence, where a student has to write his ideas on why this skill is important, what areas they can apply it in, and they also see the necessary vocabulary, that is language support, to some words to use in their writing skill. Well, the most important question is, how do we measure that such lessons work? And one of the colleagues actually asked it, So in our school, we have the whole team of analytics who collect lesson data, statistics, and scores. And we can judge, we can measure actually the effectiveness of such lessons. According to our requirements, every slide, every task of the lesson should have the score which is no lower than 9.15. And as you can see from this chart, which is taken from the lesson statistics, the lesson that I have presented to you, the scores are really high here. So we have 9.16, 10, 9.65, and so on. Yeah, so in this way, we can actually conclude that such lessons are rather effective, and that integrating this approach of content and language integrated learning lessons in our general course for adults is rather successful. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Well, your questions, please. Is everything clear? So there is a question here. So thank you for your presentation from our Indian speaker.
There is the question. Yeah, there is a question.
Can CLIL adult learners outperform non-CLIL students in speech production during online sessions, I think?
Once again, I was focusing on implementing this method for general English course. Yeah, we have traditional lessons and lessons which also comprise the approach of content, language, and integrated learning. As for outperforming, what I want to say is that first of all, implementing such lessons into the general course makes students more motivated, because as being adult learners, they are more interested in those life skills which they can get, except for English skills from the lessons. And when we teach them on nonverbal communication, on communication techniques, on the emotional intelligence, this actually helps them to perform real life. That's a very educational aspect of the whole learning process. And as for production, speech production, can adult learners outperform? I think that depends, first of all, on the subject, because we can say that any academic subject can be taught in this way. So if you take a student who, I don't know, is studying psychology, who knows a lot on communication techniques, and the student who is on general English course and who has just taught a few techniques of nonverbal communication, I don't think that the first one would outperform him in the production stage, because it depends probably on the effectiveness of the lesson framework. If we provide the first and the second student with the same level and the same quantity of all the necessary tasks, I mean, all the controlled, semi-controlled practice for lexical units, for recycling grammar. So here probably the knowledge of language comes first.
Yes, certainly. This can be integrated, and this must be integrated, certainly. And it depends also, I think, on students and on their abilities and their desire maybe to learn a language. Okay, no more questions. No more questions.